Thank you. Well, I'd like to start by just saying thank you so much for spending some time to find out a little bit more about the work that Make Space for Girls are doing. We're a campaigning charity, and we're campaigning to try and make parks and similar spaces more welcoming to teenage girls. And when we started to draw together the evidence base for our campaign, one of the things that we wanted to do was to talk to teenage girls. And one of the things that we found when we talked to them was this sort of response from Lily. When we were asking her, what do you like about parks? What do you like less about parks? What do you do in parks? Her answer was very simple. Why would I go to the park? There's nothing there for me. And that's really what we're trying to change. At the moment, teenage girls are badly served by a lot of parks, and we just need to unpick why that is. And part of the problem, a big part of the problem, is that when facilities are built for teenagers, they're almost always skate park, Muga basketball court, that sort of fenced pitch area, and then a BMX track or a pump track or something for sort of wheeled sports that isn't a skate park. And what we see in practice, and I think, you would all see this when you go around your own parks, is all of these spaces are dominated by boys and young men. The only exception to that is if a pitch has been hired to be used by an all-girls team. But when they're in free play, these spaces are all dominated by boys and young men. Another thing that we often see is that this triumvirate of facilities is actually enshrined in policy documents, in play strategies, in planning councils. It's all written down. It's in black and white. And that's what means we keep perpetuating these issues. I've just pulled out a couple of areas. One, that's a local council play area audit and action plan that was done in 2020, so relatively recent. And what they say their ambition is, our aim is to provide activity zones for young adults of 12 plus years in all the major settlements, e.g. Muga, skate park, BMX track, etc. And they're using the phrase young adults. But what they're not recognising is those are all facilities that, if they are installed, will be dominated by boys and young men. They won't serve young adults of 12 plus. And another one, this is a more nationwide one, and I'm sure a number of you will have come across the Fields in Trust guidance, which is called Beyond the 6 Hectare Standard. And this is a standard that's used for deciding, how much space needs to be allocated for sports and physical activity. And they talk about leaps and neeps, these smaller play areas. But then they say these play areas can be complemented by other facilities, including multi-use games areas and skate parks, etc. And what we see time and time again is because this particular set of guidance is adopted by councils and is used by developers, that there's immediate default to the Muga and skate park. And we've even heard examples of a developer saying to a council, no, the Fields and Trust guidance says you get a Muga or a skate park. So we're going to give you one of those. So these baked in provisions in our guidance can be a real issue for trying to make space more inclusive. Let's just look at those two in a little bit more detail and think about some of the data. Skate parks, this data is from Skateboard GB, which is our national governing body on skateboarding. 85% of skateboarders are male and 80% of them are under 18. So that's a lot of missing teenage girls there. And what the research shows us is that boys often drive girls away from the skate park through exclusion and harassment. Now, pausing there, when we talk sometimes, people say, oh, but I go to the skate park with my 9-year-old. And when I go, it's really nice. Everybody's really helpful. Everybody's really inclusive, and there's no bad language at all. So how do we square these two visions? Are they completely different skate parks? No, they're not. But what we are seeing is that adults are a great enforcer of equality and fairness and better behaviour. And in the same way that a lot of the sexual harassment that goes on in school doesn't occur in front of the teachers, the behaviour that leads boys to drive girls away from the skate park doesn't occur in front of the parents. And that's something that we need to sort of just keep in mind. There's been some quite interesting research in the US where they put activity trackers on teenagers, and they found that living near a park makes it more likely that a teenage girl will do exercise, which is fantastic, because that's what we all want to happen. But actually, living near a skate park lowered the amount of exercise taken because it was deterring the girls from going into that space. Multi-use games areas, hard surface play areas, they are used more by boys than girls. There's very little data that's been collected about Muggers, but we did a park survey, a very nice multi-use games area down in the southwest, and we observed 60 people using that Mugger over the course of a fine spring weekend. Of those 60, 3 were girls. There were no women, they were all girls. So, a very low percentage of use by girls. There's data that shows the girls play much more actively in a playground that doesn't have this sort of hard surface. And these surfaces are very open to territorialization. They're prescriptive, they're fenced, they can have single entrances, and they often don't feel safe to girls, but also to quite a lot of boys. Why does any of this matter? You could say we've had Muggers and skate parks for years. Some people like them, some people don't. Does it really matter? And we say, yes, it does matter. There's a basic principle of fairness. Why shouldn't girls have facilities in parks that are designed to meet their needs? And then there's health. We all know what inactivity does to people's physical and mental health, and the amazing role that being in parks can play, particularly for populations where the park may be their main access to green space and nature. Safety. Safety is really important, and we believe that teenage girls should grow up believing they have a right to feel safe when they go outdoors, that they shouldn't grow up thinking, well, I shouldn't go outside because it's not supposed to be safe for me, so I should police my own behaviour and stay inside. We think that's wrong. And then finally, there's the law. There's Article 31 of the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child, and that enshrines the right to play for all children and young people up to the age of 18. So it really includes teenagers. And this is something that I think is missing from a lot of council play consideration. The lot of play provision kind of stops at 10, 12, maybe 14. But actually, we should be recognising the need to play for all teenagers. And then there's a public sector equality duty, which I'm going to come on to in a couple of slides. But that's an important legal obligation for local authorities and for councils. Now, this slide gives us a bit of data, and I apologise because it's quite a dense slide. But actually, I think that's important because the weight of evidence behind building the case that we need to change is really significant. The evidence is absolutely there. A research led by young women in Glasgow in the summer of 2021, so when we were all really appreciating parks because of lockdown, only 20% of women and girls who used parks felt comfortable in their chosen park. So this isn't 20% of all women felt comfortable. This is 20% of women who are using parks, and this isn't in all parks. This is in the park that they've chosen to use. And despite that, there's only 20% of them who feel very comfortable in their chosen park. I think there's also a really interesting point around the gap between what experts think and what users perceive. And there's been some recent research by Leeds University, which shows that 89% of park professionals think that the parks in their area were very safe or fairly safe for women and girls. So sort of 90% of park professionals. Same question asked of teenage girls, only 22% of girls felt the same. There's a huge gap there, and we need to try and understand that, I think, because only if we understand it can we try and address it so that we get to the stage where 90% of girls think their parks are very or fairly safe. That would be amazing. Rowntree Park in York, a very wonderful park. 90% of girls who were into skating aged 10 to 17 felt uncomfortable on their local skate park. And this feels like, such an awful thing, because these aren't girls who don't want to skate. These are girls who are into skating. They want to skate, but they don't feel comfortable on their local skate park. And then finally, there's been some wonderful research done by Women in Sport in Yorkshire Sport that was published in the summer of 2022. They surveyed nearly 400 boys and girls to find out about the barriers that they face to park use. And we found that 68% of girls were like Lily. They said there's nothing for us to do there. Lily was not in any sort of minority. And 50% of them said there's literally no sporting activity for us to do in the park at all. There's a really interesting gap between whether boys and girls feel safe to exercise in the parks. 26% of boys don't feel safe, and that's bad. Boys should feel safe in the park, but it jumps to 49% of girls not feeling safe to exercise in the park. So we've got to address this. And then finally, 59% of girls said they didn't feel welcome in the park because the spaces in the park are dominated by boys. And this is what girls are telling us in the summer of 2022. So what do teenagers want? Because teenagers are very happy to talk not just about what's not working, but what would they like? And they were asked, the same 400 were asked, what would make you more active in the park? And the bar chart here shows their responses to this. And what we can see is that swings, trampolines, play equipment, wanting to be playful, ranked very highly for the teenage girls. Now, I don't think anybody was particularly surprised that skate parks and Muggers didn't go so well for the girls. But I think what a lot of people were quite surprised by was that they didn't actually rate very highly with the boys either. We can see the multi-use games area, 39% of boys. So a substantial minority, but still a minority. Skate park, 31%. The only thing that was less popular than the skate park was a music and dance space, which is kind of, quite an unusual and unexpected, I think, result. I mentioned the public sector equality duty. Public sector equality duty requires public authorities, local councils, when they're making decisions, to proactively consider three things. They need to consider how to eliminate unlawful discrimination. They need to consider how to advance equality between the advantaged and disadvantaged groups. And they need to consider how to foster good relations between advantaged and disadvantaged groups. And what we can see from the data that we've just looked at is that teenage girls are currently disadvantaged when it comes to the provision for teens in parks. And what the public sector equality duty does is it imposes a legal obligation on public authorities to proactively consider how they're going to address this. So I just want to finish by a few words about, what might change look like? And I think what we'd emphasize is that this is about the need to create parks that work better for teenage girls, non-binary young people, and the boys who don't use Muggers, skate parks, and BMX tracks. It's not about painting things pink, and it's not about separating boys and girls. And it's not about getting rid of Muggers, skate parks, or BMX tracks. But what it is about creating spaces that work more inclusively for all of our young people. We need to think about these spaces differently, not to reach for the provision that says, something for our 12+ young adults, it's a Mugger, it's a skate park, it's a BMX track. We've got to think differently about this. I think it's really important that we engage with girls and other minoritized genders to understand the barriers that they face and what would make things better for them. I think it's about giving support to people to do things differently, because that's kind of scary. It's very easy to pull the thing out of the catalogue, to do the thing that everybody else has done, to put in the Mugger, to put in the skate park. It's been done before. You kind of know what the outcome's going to be. Doing something different, people need support to do that. And I suppose I'd finish just by saying that if we can make these spaces more inclusive, we'll really be driving and generating social value for our parks, because we'll be making them better places for the whole community. So on that note, I will finish.